Welcome everyone to the Dominguez Rancho Adobe Museum webinar series for kind of highlighting the work for our California Naturalist program. My name is Elliot. I am the Southern California Community Education Specialist for California Naturalist, and Dominguez Rancho Adobe Museum is one of our partners, and they work with Lauren to deliver our course every fall. And so this series is to introduce some of the concepts that we go over and we talk about during our California Naturalist program that would be taking place right now if it were not for COVID. So thank you guys all for joining us today. With that, I will introduce Lauren, our instructor and a professor at Santa Ana College, to take it away. And we are talking, I did want to say this, I always I love praising Lauren. One of my favorite things about Lauren is she goes on these tangential soapbox discussions whenever we're in her class that are just amazing. It's one of the best things about being in her class. I don't remember one being as impactful and as passionate as the California native plant course. So buckle in, it's going to be an amazing course. They all are, but this one's going to be extra amazing. So with that, I'll hand it over to Lauren. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Saying that it's best when I get off topic. Is that what you're saying? I am, and I will admit this first off. Hi, I'm your local biology science geek, and geek of many other fashions, and I have strong opinions about things like planting with natives and fantastic species, and I have so much admiration for our wild habitats and the adaptations they show. Like, we have got some plants out in our native habitats that are just tough as nails in ways that, you know what, maybe we don't always appreciate or notice because some of these ways are very subtle. A lot of the adaptations we're going to talk about today that make our native plants just perfectly suited for California, and no wonder they evolved here. A lot of those adaptations function not by making one plant just rock out super well adapted to its habitat all in one go. Adaptations that these plants show tend to be about a little bit at a time, and every little bit helps. And when you have all of these adaptations wrapped up into the same species, then you get a much more dramatic effect. And we're going to start talking about what some of those adaptations are and how you can identify and recognize a whole bunch of okay, so full confession, one of the most frustrating things about this particular episode and about our native plant talk is which native plants, which ones do you get to talk about, which ones do you leave behind. So you will see me be laughing at myself and be frustrated later on because we have wonderful plant life in California. We have such a massive wealth of biodiversity. We have so many beautiful plants, wild, just fantastically unusual and well adapted plants that trying to pick and choose like the foundational species to really help you see what some of our primary local native habitat types look like and what you'll find out there is like trying to pick your favorite children. It is. Or if you have multiple pets, try and pick your favorite. It's horrible. It's impossible. It's not fair. I even last night was like, oh wait, can I fit in a photo of this? No, not without making the whole thing too crowded. So you'll see what's happened. We have so many just wonderful things that I want to share with you. So now that I have warned you, there is so much more out there than that we will have time and space to talk about today. And if you get nothing else out of this morning together, I hope it is a willingness to go out and maybe see the rest that we didn't have time and opportunity to talk about this morning. I'm going to try and share with you those species that most typify the habitat types you will most often see in our area, so that when you get out there, you'll be able to recognize them. Give them a break when you get out there. All right. It was a hot summer, not as bad as it can be. I mean, we all remember the drought, but you know, our plants are just starting to come out of. They're at the tail end of the hardest time of year to survive out in the habitat out here in Southern California. So, if things are looking a little dry and raggedy, well, we'll talk about why, but give them the benefit. You know, this is not their time of year to be as spick and span and dapper as they might otherwise be. And we'll talk about what differences you should expect to see at this time of year as well. So, all of that said, welcome to Wild California. This is our native plants episode. Before we properly get underway, I would really like to take a moment just to acknowledge and recognize that the land we are living on and this landscape that we enjoy and study and that we have the privilege to experience has been under human care and stewardship for a very, very long time and far before we got here, uh, and specifically by our First Nations tribes. Our Tongva and our Tataviam local tribal civilizations go back a very long time, and they have a live history of stewardship and care for nature. And they remind us to care for Mother Nature and also for each other. So let's continue. So, all right, I want to start with you. First of all, why do we talk about plants? Even if you don't have an innate curiosity to wonder, well, what is it that I'm seeing when I go out on a hike or when I'm driving by on the highway, as we all, as Angelinos and denizens of Southern California, spend so much time in traffic. What is it that you're seeing outside your car window? The reason why we talk about plants is because they are the basis of any kind of ecosystem. Ecology is the field of biology that studies interactions between organisms and their environment. Whether those are aspects of the environment that are alive, like other organisms, other plants, other animals, or whether they're what we call abiotic, not alive. And that's things like how hot is it? What is your balance of sunny weather to cloudy? How cold does it get during the coldest point of year? How much rain do you get? Things like this. As we start studying ecosystems more and we get into more and more complex interactions, we can't we can't do anything. We can't know anything without starting and including uh, with plants, because they are the basis of every single habitat. You've got the climate. The climate makes the plants possible, and it changes what kinds of plants you get in a given area. What kinds of plants are there determines much, if not everything else, that follows. What types of birds and insects and mammals or fish or reptiles that you get. And the, those plants being there also kind of reflexively affect what kind of climate it is. Plants are carbon sink, so they hold carbon, they pull carbon dioxide out of the air during photosynthesis, which means they help clean the air. But large leafy plants, like large shady trees, also create a lot of shade, and that helps cool their region. So plants are part of climate formation for a region. They're also the physical, literal foundation for a living ecosystem. So even if plants are not normally your thing, come on, you've got to give it to them. We have to acknowledge plants. The reason being, they are the way we get energy into living life forms to begin with. So, to be really technical for just a moment, there are several different ways that living things can acquire or use energy. Uh, Autotrophism, so auto means self. Autotrophism is one of two different forms. Autotrophs are able to create their own energy. Chemotrophs do this by chemical synthesis, by using like bacteria, uh, finding other compounds and running cellular respiration, like yeast do when we use them for fermentation to make beer or wine. Plants do this by using sunlight for photosynthesis. Water, other nutrients, and light are used to run photosynthesis so that plants can pull carbon dioxide out of the air and create sugars for themselves to feed themselves. Animals like you and me, we are what are called heterotrophs, hetero meaning different or other. And that means that we unfortunately cannot make our own energy. This is why we get hungry, why we have a diet that we need to maintain. We get our energy from other places. So we go and we have to uh, eat in order to get energy wherever we are getting that food from, whether you prefer a more plant-based diet or you're more omnivorous and you like a bit of everything. You still need to pull your energy into your body from some other source. You cannot generate it for yourself. Although, wouldn't it be terribly convenient around here if we could? All right. When we talk about plants, before I get into the specifics of here are really common plants you're going to see around California, I want to talk with you for a little while about how do we talk about plants in general and how do we identify plants, different parts of plants, so that when we're going through what different local plants look like, you'll better be able to follow along and use the tips I'm going to give you for identification on your own time later on when you want to go experience our native habitats. So we're going to start with trees. They are the largest class of plants, and they're some of the easiest to appreciate and identify. Uh, Trees come in two major flavors, as it were, deciduous and evergreen. Deciduous plants at large, because there are plants that are smaller than trees that are still deciduous. So deciduous plants lose their leaves during their unfavorable season. And what this means is that some time of year is more difficult to survive than the rest of the year. Some season is more difficult to survive, is an even better way of saying this. In the rest of the country, that season is typically winter. Cold snaps can freeze water in leaves and in the upper tissues of a tree. And if that happens, it can kill the leaves or kill off that whole part of the tree, which would be very concerning and potentially lethal to the entire tree. In order to avoid this, deciduous plants had slowly evolved a very large, very dramatic adaptation. As the most difficult time of year starts to come on, typically signaled by temperature change, uh, they basically batten down the hatches and they ratchet down their survival requirements to just the absolute minimum, as close to death as they can get without actually giving up the ghost. Part of this process is pulling all of the water and other major molecules, other major cellular structures that they have made that would take a lot of energy to replace. That would be the technical term in biology for this is energy expense. So these are major structures that would be very energetically expensive to lose and try and replace all in one go when it's time to recover themselves. So deciduous plants, as they're preparing for the most difficult time of year, whenever that is in their climate, will pull all the water out of their leaves and along with it, major pigments. The major pigment that makes leaves green is called chlorophyll, which is a wonderful, wonderful example of how biology just mixes up Latin and Greek and ticks off all of the linguists. Uh, and at the same time, we name pretty much everything, and we are not always super creative about the naming. Phyll, the suffix phyll from chemistry, Phyll, denotes that something is a pigment. Chloro means green. So what is it? It is the pigment that makes the leaves green. What shall we name it? That. That, but in Latin to make it sound professional. Yes, much more respectable that way. So plants pull chlorophyll out of their leaves, and this is what causes the change of color that we notice and appreciate come fall. Pulling the chlorophyll out of the leaves reveals all of the other pigments that were there the whole time that nobody was properly appreciating but the plant. These pigments typically run to orange, yellow, and red. And they've got a couple of names. They're called carotenoid pigments, like carrot, but spelled a bit differently. which, yes, refers to the yellow, red, orange, mostly red, orange light spectrum. They're also called satellite pigments because the plant uses them to expand out the amount of light that they can absorb in their leaves to run photosynthesis. So they're sort of like satellites that just expand how big that range of light is that those leaves can actually absorb. When plants pull all the chlorophyll out of their leaves, they reveal the satellite pigments that have been there all along, the entire supporting cast of pigments that were in the leaves the whole time, and creates that beautiful show of fall fire that we get mostly in places not Southern California. But even here, like if you have a crepe myrtle in your yard or if you see them planted in a city park, you'll notice right when it starts to get cool that they go through the most gorgeous change of color. It really is wonderful to see. And if you travel to any other part of the US, you'll see it properly put on display in any cooler climate. Now, I do want to say before I move on to evergreen trees, uh, the reason why I reminded us that there are deciduous plants that are not trees is we have a whole type of deciduousness here in California that is rather different from the deciduousness that we see in the rest of the continent of North America. And it's because of our climate. Out here, as you folks well know from living out here in Southern California specifically, our winters are not exactly the toothsome, toothy creatures that they are back east. Yeah, sure, we get cool weather come winter, but this isn't Minnesota or, the howling winter winds around Chicago come January. Areas in like Michigan is like, oh, yeah, sure, we get double digits in winter. There's just a negative sign in front of it. For us out here, winter isn't really the hardest time to survive. Yes, traffic gets awful because everybody forgets how to drive in the rain when we finally get some. But for our plants and our wildlife, winter's not so bad. Winter, when we finally get rain, perfect time for plants. Everything starts to green up again soon after. Just wait and see. Watch our hills and our mountains. Maybe a couple days after we finally get some decent rain, and you'll see everything start to perk up very quickly. No, for our plants, the hardest time to survive is summer. Long, hot, dry, and longer, hotter, and drier all the time. This is the unfavorable season for our native plants. And no small few of them get by pulling this incredible survival stunt just at a different time of year than plants do in the rest of the country. Our plants are what are called drought deciduous. And this isn't to say that every single native plant is drought deciduous, but our long-lived plants often are. They survive by porting all of that water and that chlorophyll and every other large, energetically expensive molecule down into their roots for the entirety of the summer. You see, even in the midst of a Southern California heat wave, when you walk outside and it is 122 degrees in the shade, and you rethink going outside, uh, just a few inches beneath the soil, the temperature really doesn't change nearly as much, sometimes shockingly little, which means that water is much less likely to dry up and dehydrate out of the roots. And it also preserves those energetically expensive major molecules like chlorophyll. It's a perfect way of preserving, basically in their own literal root cellar. And I'm not sorry for the pun. There may be more later. I have a terrible sense of humor. This is what comes from studying science. I warn you now. um, so this is why when you head out hiking or taking a walk and enjoying the scenery or taking a drive, anytime that it's properly warm here in Southern California, Our hills and our mountains may look a little dry. They may look rather brown. Some of those species only live for a brief period of time, and they are dead in truth. The summer heat is enough to kill off even a hardy plant if it doesn't have the right adaptations to survive it. Those plants have other adaptations to get by, don't worry. But a lot of our larger, hardier, more long lived plants, they're not dead. They may be looking a little below the weather, they may not be looking properly themselves, a little ragged, but they're not dead. No, they are purposefully evolved to our climate, adapted to our climate, and they are sitting there for months just as close to death as they can actually maintain without dying. Wait for more water to become available, wait for cooler temperatures to start to edge into our weather, and many of our native plants that are drought deciduous will start to green out again. You'll see fresh leaf buds all over the place as they finally come out of this deep, deep dormancy. Uh, just imagine if we had to do that. Oh God, it's a bit hot outside, and just all of your vital signs went as close to flatline as possible without actually letting you die for months. There are some animals that are capable of doing this, but humans are certainly not one of them. So I have always admired our local plants for just being able to pull this stunt and survive. On the flip side, some plants are evergreen, and this means that they do not lose their leaves all during one season all at once. This doesn't mean, contrary to popular misconception, this doesn't mean that they never lose their leaves at all. Instead, they'll lose them a few at a time. It's just that they are constantly growing new leaves, so the entire plant always looks green in general. Uh, Classic evergreen trees, especially in this case, are anything that you would see sold as a Christmas tree, conifers. That includes pine trees, fir trees, spruce as well. However, there are also some native plants out here in Southern California that are technically evergreens, but they are not conifers. And they're able to keep their leaves green and the whole entire plant green, slowly dropping older leaves as they reach the end of their ideal lifespan as they go. And I'll make sure that you recognize this when we see them. All right, so I've talked about trees. Let's talk heavily about shrubs. Most of the plants that I'll be showing you today that are really the foundation of their species are shrubs. Where trees have one large trunk, shrubs will have many smaller stems. Uh, Not as small as, say, a wildflower, but, well, here, have an example. All right, so these are shrubs. Many smaller stems or smaller trunks, if you prefer, coming up from the ground. They usually are about hip to waist high on most folks, reaching a height on average of about 15 feet, but there are some notable exceptions. These are primarily the plants that help define a lot of our most common habitats for our area. We also have woody vines, which we do actually have down here in Southern California. For instance, we have a native California grape. It does bear fruit. It does grow well out here. And actually, if you'd like to see one grown in the garden where you can get to it easily, the nature garden around the back of Madrona Marsh, the Madrona Marsh Nature Center, has a large brick wall entirely covered in just one California grapevine. You should go visit it. All right. So we've been talking about woody plants that typically live for quite a long while. But I also want to talk really briefly about non-woody or herbaceous plants. So these are plants that are typically what we call annuals. A perennial plant will live for many seasons, many years. An annual plant will grow from seed, set seed, so it'll grow all the way up, bloom, reproduce, set seed, and die inside of 1 year. 1 year, and even not even an entire year. Uh, the way they survive from year to year is that, uh, for instance, Perennial herbaceous plants typically have bulbs of some kind or a stronger root system, and that will let them sort of hibernate through that most difficult time of year. When rain and optimal conditions return, that whole upper above ground part of the plant will grow all over again from the root system. For instance, our state flower, the California poppy, is a wonderful example of this. It'll grow back from the roots underground every year. An example that uses bulbs is blue dix. Now, pardon the name, but that is the common name. And it's this beautiful form of wild grass that grows these lovely, delicate sort of blue purple flowers, and it's a bulb, so it'll grow back from the bulb every single year. There's a whole suite of plants that are annuals, however, and they will go through that life to death in one cycle, in 1 year cycle every single year. The way they survive is they set so much seed when they produce. They just dump all kinds of new generations of seeds down into the soil, and the seeds will survive dormant during the most difficult time of year down in the soil. And again, when optimal conditions return, when we get the right temperatures, the right amount of water, in some cases, even right after fire. Check this one out. We have an entire class of annual herbaceous, meaning small, delicate plants that only show up in our habitat following fire. So much so that they are even called fire following plants. They do this because part of what triggers their seeds to grow is the return of ash into the soil, specifically particular nutrients that get recycled back down into the soil when adult plants burn. The plants that are able to grow first and get first access to this fresh wave of nutrients are basically the Olympians of the plant world. They grow bigger, faster, stronger, and they're healthier throughout their entire lives. So that first come, first access boom of nutrients that hits the soil after fire is a huge benefit to this entire class of mostly flowers and small herbs. And it's such a make or break benefit, we don't see them sprout at any other time. It may be a little counterintuitive, but in this and some other ways, wildfire, when it's not out of control, can actually be terribly beneficial for an area by bringing back this massive boom of biodiversity. Hmm. All right, let's talk just a little bit about how we talk about plants. So the major structure that supports the leaves and supports the upward growth of a plant is its stem. Some stems are very heavily adapted for different styles of plant life, like the stems of vines are really heavily adapted for climbing and holding on to rocks and even other plants. The stems of some cacti, as you can see here, have been heavily adapted out to hold water. All right, so stems can go through a lot of different really heavy adaptations in order to help that plant better survive. At the base of the stem is a bud. And this can be a flower bud or a leaf bud. This is a clump of tissue that's going to be specialized to grow something new. It may be a new stem to start a branch. It may be a leaf or a flower. Uh, those buds are going to be protected by something called bracts. And a bract is a form of leaf that's slowly changed over evolutionary time to be thicker, sometimes waxier, and they are a protective layer that shields those tender growing tissues until they're ready to sort of break out on their own. Uh, when a brand new bout of growth is ready to begin, the bracts relax, they open, and that allows whatever is growing inside to emerge and start really growing upward or outward. Afterwards, the bracts dry out and fall off. When we are looking at plants, There are two major structures we frequently use to identify what plant species it is that we're looking at. Leaves are one of the most important. I mean, let's be honest, there are many features we're looking at, but leaves are one of the most important. When we look at leaves, we look at leaf shape and leaf growth pattern. A leaf that is one large leaf blade, all coming off of one stem, as we see here with this beautiful example to the right, is called a simple leaf, meaning that it's not divided. By comparison, compound leaves have many leaflets coming off of one major stem. See how these leaves don't really each have their own stem. They grow directly off of this main stem, and that comes back to another stem cluster. This is a compound or divided leaf. Leaf shapes, lobed or smooth or serrated, can become a lot more complex from there. But this, simple versus compound, is one of the most clear-cut and common distinctions that we make in leaf shape. We also look at, like I said, leaf growth pattern, or how they're arranged on the stem. Some leaves alternate between which side of the leaf they're growing on. See how these sort of spiral up the length of their stem, going back and forth as they go? This is an alternate growth pattern. Opposite, by comparison, means that leaves grow off a stem in pairs that come off at the same time, left and right together. In pairs, just one after another, like here to the left. And certainly not least, nor last, but one of the most common as well, is whorled. Whorled means you have a set of leaves that comes off in a circular pattern all the way around the stem, all at the same time. We don't see this very much in trees or in shrubs, but in our herbaceous plants, perennial or annual, we see this rather often. All right, let's talk about the other major structure we use for IDs, flowers. Now, flowers are not available all year round, but if you're out during our springtime, flowers are a beautiful thing to see to begin with. And they're also a very, very useful way to help you identify what kind of plant is it that you're seeing in the first place. So let's just walk through the parts of the flowers so you'll know what you're looking at. The tough green, they look like leaves, but not quite at the base of a flower, are called sepals. And they function like bracts. They protect the flower bud while it's getting ready to bloom. And then they open when that flower is finally ready to go ahead and bloom and do all of its growth. Inside, petals are all about advertisement. They visually attract pollinators to the flower to come get pollen, to come get food of some kind, help that plant reproduce. They are brightly colorful because many pollinator species have colored vision, but they even have some markings that your eyes and mine can't even see. Markings in usually the ultraviolet lightscape. If we could see these markings as, say, we can take a filter and apply a UV, take a photo and apply a UV filter over it, we end up seeing that there are spots and stripes leading like landing pads, like running lights along an airport landing pad to the center of the flower, pointing out where the food is. They're like a giant neon sign that says, "Eat at Joe's." Only Joe is like a broom flower, pointing in directly to where pollinators should go for their food reward. When they get there, at the center of the flower, they will find stamens and pistils. Pardon me this morning. Stamens are the portion of a flower that produce pollen. Pistils are all about seed production. At the base of the pistil, so here we've got, here are stamens being suspended and held up on what is called a filament. It's called a filament because it's just about as fine as a hair. And these hold structures that grow pollen, that develop pollen, up to be smeared onto whatever pollinator happens to come along. A pistil, on the other hand, has a sticky surface here at the top to receive pollen. so that pollen will stick and perhaps work its way down to fertilize the ovaries down at the bottom of the pistil, uh, and perhaps develop into seeds for the next generation of that plant. Some of our pollinators can be a little surprising, and some of them I'm sure you know very well. Uh, Honeybees, butterflies, and many birds, like hummingbirds, for example, are really well known pollinators. Animals at large have a very, very long evolutionary history of working with plants, uh, sometimes being even tricked by plants into helping those plants reproduce. Sometimes it's a very simple relationship of providing food to that pollinator as this honeybee is getting pollen and nectar as for food. It's also getting very well doused in that bright yellow powder. That powder is pollen. And when that bee moves to the next flower, it will deliver some of that pollen to the pistils of the next flower, helping those plants reproduce so long as they're of the same species. Some pollinators are a little bit more dramatic. In some of our local deserts, especially to the east of us, there are some types of cacti that are only pollinated by bats. Bats, however, are not really evolved to make delicate landings on flowers, and these flowers do make an awful lot of pollen. So, what happens is you have a bat pretty much face planting at full speed into a flower, and it's glorious. It's when you were a kid and you were watching maybe Saturday morning cartoons, did you ever see a cartoon character get hit in the face with like a stage makeup powder puff, just poof, and suddenly the whole screen is nothing but makeup? Yeah, it's pretty much that. It's fantastic. There's footage of this on the internet. Go Google it or look for it on YouTube. You will find video of this. It's nothing short of fantastic. I love it. Once successful fertilization has happened, post pollination, oh, we'll get there. Pardon me. Just there's so many things I want to talk with you about. The way that flowers work. Flowers are visual cues primarily. That color, those markings, help bring pollinators in by attracting their visual attention. They're not the only way that plants use to help draw pollinators in, though, especially if you've got really dense habitat or plants that are pollinated at night. At night, flower color doesn't mean so much. It's much more difficult to see, say, even a vibrant red or yellow or orange flower against the darkness. But perfume, you can help you identify and find a flowering plant from a long ways away, and perfume doesn't care whether it's light or dark out. It's not impacted. So perfume, fragrance is a wonderful way for blooming plants to help attract pollinators. Some plants don't even need pollinators, though. Instead, they just produce so much pollen that the moment wind moves through the plant, it'll pick up that pollen and move it. Seeds as well. Other seeds are moved by animals, seed dispersers. Sometimes there is a sticky layer to that seed that's oil rich and a very good food source. This is a great way to attract ants to come help move seeds for that plant. The technical term for a layer like this, that is an oil rich body, is an eliosome. Other seeds are moved because they're surrounded by a layer that's edible, as in the case of edible fruit. Others still are transported externally, and they may catch hooks into your cat or dog's fur, or even say the feathers of a bird, and be moved along and spread into a new area as that animal travels. All right, now that we've had a whole lot of information all at once, I want to talk with you a bit about what kinds of plants you may see here in Southern California. And I do want to first establish that what we're going to talk about uh, are some habitat types that we see really well here in California, but goodness, they are not the only habitat types here in California. I have really, really, really tightly narrowed down the list I'm about to present to you to those that you'll see most often here in the Southern California region, around LA, Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Diego counties. All right. What we have here these habitats are the result of our Mediterranean climate, that those long, hot, dry summers and relatively survivable, cool, wet, but not really cold winters. The habitat types we're going to talk about today are chaparral, coastal sage scrub, oak woodlands, as well as pine woodlands and redwood forest, with the concentration on mostly chaparral and coastal sage scrub because you will see them best and most often here in our area. So, chaparral. Chaparral and coastal sage scrub are visually very similar and they do share a lot of plants in common. But things that help differentiate them are chaparral grows more inland, and typically its plants are taller. You may see trees, you may see taller shrubs. It's hotter and drier than CSS, coastal sage scrub, in general, and especially on south facing hillsides that get more sun. These plants are really well adapted to dealing with drought, to dealing with rocky soil, to dealing with just not getting a whole lot of rain every year. This whole ecosystem, this habitat type, is heavily populated by shrubs with some smaller plants in between. And here are some of our classic examples. Toyon is one of our native shrubs that gets to be a bit bigger. Toyon can even reach up to 30 feet tall at a record. It's also frequently evergreen. It does not drop its leaves all at once, but will drop a few at a time. So even in the hottest, driest parts of the summer, you will still find green leaves on a toyon. Yucca, you'll know by its very tall, very bright white bunches of flowers, one giant inflorescence or flower bunch per plant. Laurel sumac, you'll tell by its classically described to students as a taco shell shaped leaf, that folded leaf. Oh, pardon me. Go ahead and don't want to jump ahead. There's just so much I want to share with you. Bush sunflower is a really common shrub that you'll see out here. It's one of our tender earth shrubs. It's got a very silvery colored leaf, and you're actually going to see this really often amongst our plants. That silver color is actually a heat adaptation. It helps reflect a little light away, and they're actually covered in what are called trichomes, very, very fine plant hairs that act like a type of mini plant air conditioning. They trap a thin layer of air against the leaves, and that layer of air doesn't change temperature quite as much. You'll see the same thing down here on Yerba Santa. These leaves are actively fuzzy, almost like felt, with these trichomes, and it also helps produce that silvery color. Other major plants that help define chaparral are California buckwheat, with its bunches of flowers that may verge from cream to pale pink. Also chamise, with leaves that look a bit like rosemary, coyote bush, and lemonade berry. The outer layer of the lemonade berry is actually edible and quite refreshing, but it frequently hybridizes with another plant called sugar bush, at which point we don't get the same fruit. On the other hand, coastal sage scrub is coastal, has a much shorter average plant height, 8 feet and below, and it tends to be very, very dense with a lot more herbaceous plants in between shrubs filling in that space. It's heavily defined by different types of shrubs, and particularly sages. Now here I've got black sage, but other types include Cleveland sage, purple sage, Mexican blue sage if you head to our south, and white sage as well. These are wonderfully aromatic plants. So is California sagebrush, which you see at the bottom of the slide. And if you brush past them, they release a beautiful scent. Other major plants that you'll see are deerweed, which changes colors. The flowers change color as the flowers get older. When they first bloom, they are bright yellow. After they've been pollinated and they get older, they tend to shade to red, to orange to red, And that's actually an adaptation that tells pollinators, this flower's already been pollinated. It doesn't have food for you. Visit another one. We also have scrub oak, which is a true oak, but a much shorter version, different species. And we also have some of our local cacti, in this case, coastal prickly pear. Also here in Southern California, we have salt marshes. Now, this is a habitat type that maybe is not as well appreciated. So I want you to go ahead and be able to have a look at it. Salt marsh plants are tough as nails in a whole other way. We have examples here locally that you'll be able to appreciate over at Los Cerritos Wetlands and Bolsa Chica. Here's the thing. An intertidal area like this that gets a regular influx of salt has to deal with salt levels that would be poisonous to any normal plant. On top of that, they have low access to oxygen in their soil. One or the other of these challenges would kill most plants. These plants in salt marshes get both at the same time. So we see so many adaptations for pulling in extra oxygen or just doing without, and also dealing with all of the extra salt. A lot of our local plants that deal well with this situation are pickleweed, aka glasswort, saltbush of two different types, and goldenrod. We've got a couple different species of goldenrod out here also. One thing I want to point out really quickly, see how thick the leaves are on this particular saltbush and the pickleweed. Note how swollen they are, not almost like cacti, but these are not cacti. Instead, these plants they share a particular adaptation. That salt that would normally kill them, they're using as a defensive line against herbivores. Instead of getting rid of that salt and filtering it out of the water they're pulling in, they take that salt and they store it in specialized structures in their leaves. Any animal that tried to take a mouthful would get so much salt it would be a shock. These plants are functionally very well defended from something trying to munch on them because they are so salty, they're not fit food anymore. So they have an adaptation that takes them from having a weakness to a major strength. We also have several types of woodland out here. Oak woodlands are a silent battleground. We have many different species of oak, and they all secrete something that's called dendrotoxins out of their roots. And what this means is that other plants with very deep roots cannot grow down and start competing with an oak's roots. They'll get deterred or even killed off by these dendrotoxins that the oak roots are secreting to help defend themselves and keep access to the water that they can get. So you look at this nice, clear, open structure, not a whole lot of shrubs all of a sudden, but still plenty of plants with shallower roots because they are short enough in the root system that they're not competing with the oaks. So what sort of thing do we see growing with the oaks? Small bract sedge, oak gooseberry when possible. One of our most popular, most common oak species is California live oak. Here you can see its leaves and the overall trees in general and how large they can be, but also some wildflowers like California thistle and baby blue eyes. Another type of forest that we get out here is the conifer forest. Remember I was talking about pine trees and such? We've got a couple different types. We've got Douglas fir, that's here on the left. All right, see how thin the layers of its pine cones are, how thin and delicate. All right, that's Douglas fir. On the other hand, we've got knobcone pine, and these can often show up in the same kind of forest system together. See how, by comparison, how much heavier these pine cones are, and see how the scales of the pine cone are much larger and how they grow much more densely. All right, Douglas on the left, knob pine cone on the right to help you differentiate. We've also got closed pine cone forest. Now we have some other types of cone forest, conifer forest, but again, I've narrowed down what you're going to see most often here in Southern California. On the right, we'll start with the right this time. So some of the types of pine tree that you'll find in closed cone pine forest are lodgepole pines with much smaller pine cones. That one's not fully grown, but it will get a little bit bigger. On the other hand, coulter pines, pardon, here's them still growing. Coulter pines, when they are fully mature, will be larger than your head. When I was very young, I was told while hiking that one of the common names for coulter pine is the widowmaker pine. Because if one of those pine cones happens to break off and fall on you, well, you can take it from there. Uh, these pine these pine forests are sometimes known as phoenix that can rise from the ashes. Really tightly closed pine cones of these and a few other pine species require fire to help them open. Uh, and what that means is that when they do open, when fire comes through an area, and it helps those pine cones open, those that have survived being eaten by squirrels and such, all of those seeds get released all at once. It's the same benefit that fire following plants use at a smaller scale, but here to help a whole forest reproduce and recover. Some other plants that we find along with these pines are Brodea, which is a beautiful annual little wildflower, as well as Manzanita, which is a large flowering shrub, and thank goodness appears in a variety of other habitat types, as well as Ceanothus. Ceanothus is also known as California lilac and can have huge bunches of flowers, verging anywhere from pale blue, almost white, to practically purple. Last but not least, we've got our redwood forests that we don't see locally, but that we're famous for here in California. These are our redwoods and our sequoias. All right. Their range is so much smaller than they used to be, but their growth is still stupendous. Now, I want to finish really briefly with what you may want to look for if you're interested in seeing some of these native plants around your own home. Since our major drought, a lot of nurseries have become a lot better about making some native plant species available. They are naturally drought tolerant, which means that you won't need to water them nearly as often or as much once they're well established. Before the drought, a lot of folks had the misconception that planting with natives or xeriscaping, planting for dry weather, meant gravel and cacti. And you can do that if you like that. That does work perfectly well. But if you would like color, our native plants can give you a lot to choose from. Sticky leaf monkey paw flower may have the best name on earth and has many different subspecies with colors from pale cream to vivid peach to red. Penstemons are just as wildly varied. Penstemon is a perennial herbaceous plant. It will grow back from its roots year after year. Some species, as you can see on the right, are vivid red. Others are magenta, fuchsia, blue, purple, or pink. Mallows, bush or island, can be very delicately colored or very vibrant. They're beautiful. We have several different varieties of native lupins. There's bush lupin that's bright yellow. Here's silver bush lupin that has sort of a silvery top at the top of this stand of flowers and verges down to blue purple. And of course, our sages all bloom, and they bloom beautifully. White sage has a very pale white to slightly blue flower. Black sage has got a blue to almost purple. Mexican blue sage has a almost cobalt blue flower. It's a very small, very delicate plant, and it's a small, delicate flower, but very colorful. So if you find you might be willing to give native plants a try, if you see some out on a hike and find them beautiful, there's a lot of really well supplied nurseries in our area that can help you grow them at home. They will need help getting established. They'll need regular watering like any other plant for the first typically year or two even for large shrubs. After that, though, you can cut back on how much you're watering and often just leave them alone. Maybe water once a week, if that. We even have some plants that will survive better if you basically just ignore them and let them survive on their own. Now, I see as many different things as I wish I could still talk about with you. I see that we have filled our hour very rapidly. We'd like to do a little Q&A section. Are there any questions that I can help with or answer for anyone?
We don't have any in the chat as of yet, Lauren, but we definitely have. What time is it right now? Quick time check. It's about noon. So we
Yeah.
do have some time. If anyone has any questions they want to ask Lauren directly, you can unmute yourself, and or you can type it in the chat if you'd rather, and I can read aloud for you. But we do have some time for a quick Q&A if you guys want to.
I know that I cover an awful lot in an hour, but if there's anything I can help anyone with, I'd be happy to.
We did have a question come in. Any SI that can grow in my yard that will distract mosquitoes?
Oh, okay. Actually, I would like to make a suggestion for that. Any of our sages or California sagebrush. So sages and sagebrush are two different classes of plants. Both of them will help keep annoying insects out of your yard. In fact, they have a long history of being dried and stuffed into bedding, believe it or not, to help keep away things like fleas, ticks, and yes, mosquitoes. The same chemicals, the same compounds in the leaves that make them smell lovely to you and me are actually a defense to the plant. Those aromatic chemicals help drive away insects that we would typically find to be pests. So you may like to try any one of the sages that I talked about, black sage, white sage, but sagebrush as well also does a very good job of this. So if you find mosquitoes or any other really bothersome insects are haranguing you in your yard, you may like to perhaps plant a plant that will help you defend your area chemically.
We also had another question about dog safe plants, I'm assuming for natives.
Yes. Okay. So there's two different things that we need to discuss when we talk about what makes a plant safe to be around our favorite pets. The first is, do they have seeds that are going to hook into and burrow into our pet's fur or even into the skin? For that, you will really want to avoid a lot of native grasses. A lot of our native grasses have hooks in their seeds that'll help hook into a dog's fur, but some of them are really sharp enough that they may even work their way in between the dog's toes. So do avoid native grasses. And in fact, a lot of invasive grasses as well, to be honest. That said, the other thing that we want to talk about is whether or not a plant is poisonous. That said, a lot of these plants are actually safe for even you to consume in moderation. So the same sages and sagebrush that can help defend your yard are fairly safe to plant around most of your animals. If you have pets, do not plant lupins. Don't plant anything else that also uses a bulb. So no blue dicks, no wild iris, nothing in the lily family at all. Or I know at the end of the year and in a couple of months, we've got Christmas coming up. If you should receive any kind of lily or iris, do not let those get around your animals. They are actually quite poisonous. Lupins are very poisonous. Don't consume any part of them. Don't let your pets around them. They are beautiful, very beautiful, but they are not safe for your dog to be around.
And then we had a question about plant placement, about direct sun in the summer, and then shade in the winter for white sage. Do we think that would work, having winter shade and a summer sun for white sage?
White sage does want some direct sun. It is one of our tough as nails, really drought adapted plants, and it can handle the sun. So you'll want to at least make sure that it gets some partial sun even in winter, especially because winter is the best time for them. It's the best time for a lot of our plants because it's when they get the best water access. Now, if you're caring for it, especially as it's getting established, it has your help. But anything you can do to make sure it still has some sun to get by with, even in winter, will be excellent. Uh, but summer sun, well, okay, it will be able to survive the summer sun. Don't worry, this is what they're adapted for. However, they are a species that can practice drought deciduousness. So if you see your white sage dry out in the summer and drop some of its leaves, it's not that you've done anything wrong as a gardener. It's a natural adaptation to help it survive that time of year. So if you do plant for full summer sun for white sage, just be aware this is an adaptation that it has. You've not done anything wrong, but it does mean that it will look a bit dry come summertime. Is there anything else I can help anybody with? Or
I have the reverse with my white sage. I have it in the shade during the summer, and in the winter, it's underneath a silver oak, a silver maple. So when the leaves fall off, it goes into direct sunlight.
See, that will do really well for them because then it's shaded over and protected during that hardest time of year, and then come winter when it's getting rain and gearing up to do a lot of growing, then it gets a whole lot of sun. No wonder it survives well for you.
Yeah. We do have a question for your contact. Are you okay if we put your contact in the email for future questions?
Absolutely. If you would like to send me an email, please just somewhere in the title line, let me know that you've got my contact information through the Wild California webinar series. Otherwise, I may accidentally think you might be a student. I teach college classes, and I get a lot of students emailing me about, do I actually have to know this for my next exam? Yes, yes, my dear, you do. Is there anything else I can answer for anyone?
I'm putting in the email right now. We're getting some thank yous and some applause. So this was absolutely amazing, Lauren. I am going to ask you my final question. What are your top 4? Do we decide on 4? What are your favorite plants? You get a tree, you get an annual, you get a perennial, and you get a bonus.
Oh no, can I sue for as many as possible?
Okay.
Oh, come on. Okay, I love Ceanothus. I think it's fantastic. I love the leaves. Okay, so I recently, a couple years ago, finally convinced my mother to start trying some planting with natives, and I got her a whole bunch of native plants. But she was always very concerned about, well, I want some pretty leaves. Ceanothus will take care of you. There's ground cover growth Ceanothus and very bushy tall Ceanothus. They have these beautiful glossy dark green leaves. They're lovely. Depending on species, because we've got a lot of different species, they can vary in size. But some of those flowers are just so vibrantly blue. They're beautiful. I love penstemons. Showy penstemon is one of my favorite wildflowers to see out in the field. So is Mottaliha poppy, which unfortunately I don't have a photo of here, but one of their common names is fried egg poppy. Huge, very delicate white poppy with a bright yellow egg yolk yellow center with a beautiful perfume, sort of a very nostalgic, soft, kind of dusty floral perfume that I have a lot of really nice associations with from working out in the field, but they reseed like crazy. So if you want to plant them in your garden, be careful. They will take off. They will try and like colonize the rest of your garden without your help. But they're beautiful, and they get to be very tall, 6 feet or more, and bushy. They're just beautiful. And this is not fair. I love oaks. I do. I love our oak trees. I love all our different species of oaks, even the scrub oak. It's little. And blue-eyed grass. Oh my goodness. So blue-eyed grass is one of our actual native grasses, different from blue dicks. It has a beautiful, delicate, striped blue and purple flower with a white throat. They're beautiful. I love all of our sages. Sticky leaf monkey paw flower, like I said, has just got the best name. It ought to get an award. Also great for your garden, and there's so many different subspecies. You can get a whole bunch of colors. And manzanitas. Oh. Okay. Oh, I know we don't have time for this. Okay, manzanitas are an evolutionary wonder. Like every single island in the Channel Islands has got a different subspecies of manzanita. Most of them are endangered. Flat out, most of them are now endangered. But they are beautiful. They've got this gorgeous, uh, like mahogany red bark. It's very thin. The flowers are this little, almost like bell-shaped arrangement. Very, very delicate pink to white. And they're great for bringing birds into your yard. If you like seeing wildlife come into your yard and you love being visited by birds, plant manzanita. It will grow slowly. Please be patient with it, but you could really help out a species that is suffering because of habitat loss. And birds love the fruit, the actual manzanitas, and they're just beautiful. They really, really are. And there's so many types of them. How many more types of plants do I get, or are we out of time?
Feel the need to chime in on manzanita because for two reasons. The word
Yes.
means little apples, like you said.
Yes, it does.
And on the island, on Catalina Island, the boars were so fond of the little apples that they would rout out the little apples underneath and eat the roots as well, and that's what caused the decline. One of the declines.
Oh no! Oh,
Yeah.
Catalina.
So
Catalina.
we did a hike one
Such a
time,
hard time.
and we went to one of the top of the ridges, and we looked down, and there's about maybe 3 dozen or 4 dozen baby manzanitas growing, and I was like, "Oh, what's that?" And they're like, "Oh, it's Catalina Island manzanita." I was like, "Oh, it's awesome! We're gonna replant those." Like, yeah, this is what's left of them. Like there
Oh
aren't no other
God.
ones on the island, so
Oh.
they've been basically routed out by the boars. So there is a definite push to get that plant reestablished on the island because of its importance, like you just said. But here, they're like you said on the mainland, they grow slow. They live to be 500 years old. They're
Oh
absolutely
yeah.
beautiful, and they're definitely a plant worth getting into your garden.
Oh yes. Please help out a major plant species that has been horribly hard hit. It'll be with you and your family for centuries, and they're beautiful. They really are. And when they get big, they provide some nice shade for themselves. They help cool down your whole yard.
They do.
Uh,
You got to put them in your will like a parrot, though.
Seriously, like you cannot. Please do not abandon your manzanita. Oh my God! Don't let somebody root out your manzanita. Oh, sudden field biologist rage. Oh no! I will take your manzanita for you.
All right, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you everyone for attending today. We will be doing this again next weekend, I believe. So stay tuned for more information. We'll sending out the information through the emails that you guys provided us. And thank you, Lauren, for this amazing talk. It is enlightening. It is always great to hear. And thank you, Dominguez Rancho Adobe, for sponsoring everything. So, all right.